There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn, the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and another episode of Zooming In, an occasional series where I engage with bookish social media luminaries the world over and talk about luminaries and all on the other side of the world. This is Anna Baillie-Karas, joining us from Adelaide, Australia, the co-host of the fabulous bookish podcast, Books on the Go. Hello, Anna.
Hi, Shawn.
Welcome back. And we're going to be talking about a really interesting article from The Guardian back in the last day of August. The title is "It's Equal Parts Exciting and Terrifying: How Authors Are Being Influenced by Their Fans." Accounts written by three of those authors, and they are Luke Jennings, Marie Lu, and S.J. Watson. So, very interesting article. What did you make of it, Anna?
Well, I loved reading about this. I love that they said terrifying. I don't think it's terrifying. That's the first thing I'll say. The idea of fans influencing authors, I think it's just all part of the spectrum. Authors might veer from the pure creative who sits in a room not engaging with society and just has the totally their own creative process and no one must influence it, and they don't care what anyone else thinks, and they're doing it for themselves, but perhaps that will be published, and some authors very successfully do that, of course, and then ranging down to the commercial, which is what does the market want end of the spectrum. And the risk of that would be the book might not feel very authentic if the authors just churned it out because the market wanted it. But I think many authors sit somewhere in the middle many authors who want to make a living sit somewhere in the middle where they are generating their ideas. They have their own creative process, but they have an ear for what people might want to read or what might make it a bit more commercial to varying degrees. And I do think that the creative process can be collaborative, maybe not for every author, and everyone has their own style. But whether it's at the beginning where you might catch up with a friend for coffee or indeed a fan over social media and brainstorm ideas, what if this happened? Well, what if they shot this person, and then, well, what if the sister came into it? Or you come up with all these different ideas, and the author then goes away and produces the work. Or later in the editing you have the collaboration where I remember famously Gordon Lish, the editor of Raymond Carver, who edited him he intervened so much with his editing that he is credited with Raymond Carver's minimalist style. So that's not a fan, obviously, collaborating. That's a very, presumably he was highly qualified, esteemed editor. But, that doesn't matter. It could be anybody that can join you in the creative venture. So I don't think it's terrifying, but I did find it really interesting the different ways in the article that these authors have been influenced, shall we say. And it could be, if you're writing, and the Marie Lu was the closest to this example that I was thinking of. If you're writing a series, it could be as simple as the fans saying, we want to know what happens to the characters next. Or Ian Rankin, for example, with his Inspector Rebus books set in Edinburgh, the crime series, the fans saying, we want Rebus to come back. We want another Rebus book. So I don't think that's impinging on the creativity, unless you as an author think, no, I'm really done with that character. I can't write another Rebus book. And who was it? Was it Agatha Christie apparently really didn't love Poirot? And then I think she almost killed him off, or I won't say what happens to Poirot at the end of the series, but I think she sort of, at one point, there was a hint that she was just writing them because the demand was so great. But he features less in some of the books. So I don't know if you've read many of them, but there are some
Not for
books
a
that it's a
long
Poirot
time.
book, but he only appears halfway through because she really didn't want it to be a Poirot book. So authors deal with it in different ways, but I think it is really interesting. I think it can be useful to engage if it's done in a collaborative way.
Yeah. So let's quickly summarize these three perspectives. So Luke Jennings, he wrote a book called Codename Villanelle, which was the basis for a BBC series, which I know nothing about, called Killing Eve. And then he got involved on an online chat room with a bunch of his fans. And then he wrote a novel based on encounters he had there. And that novel is his latest, called #Panic. So his part of this article is about that experience.
I didn't think that was an example of the fans influencing his creativity. I thought that was him using real life, as in his experience going into the chat room for his novel.
Sure, and I mean, I guess it's just a different way because that
It just,
wasn't that chat room of his fans.
yes, it happened to
So
be
then
a chat room
so
of
then he
his
based
fans. But
based a new novel on that. But you're
yeah,
right. Aside from that, they didn't influence the development of the novel, but they inspired it.
yes.
And then Marie Lu, Chinese American author of YA sci-fi novel, and she wrote a trilogy, and her fans clamored for another book, and she decided, and it inspired her to write one. Like, it just made her think about, oh, they do have a point. Whatever did happen to this person, this character, and so she wrote it, and she's writing about that experience. And then S.J. Watson maybe has gone the deepest into it, a thriller writer. His debut is called Before I Go to Sleep, and he has a Substack where he interacts with his fans. And in fact, there is a special part of that called The Experiment, where he writes his drafts and puts them up maybe daily, but very frequently, and people comment. And then he also comments on their writing of their own manuscripts. Like, it's just this really back and forth of creativity. Sounds fascinating and really, really chaotic.
Yeah. It sounds to me almost like a writer's group that he's in a sense, that you might do on people who do those courses like an MFA where they critique each other's work.
Writing workshop.
That sounds like which again goes back to just the early brainstorming stage, the collaborative, the way that you can just, other people can help you refine your idea, I suppose.
That's right. And this is not new. I mean, going back to the granddaddy of the literary novel, or of literature, Charles Dickens, and not only him, but most of the Victorian novelists who we remember today, their novels were published in serial form, and they sought, or the editors of these journals sought, reader feedback. And there has been a lot of scholarship on how this, maybe especially Dickens, took the feedback of the readers and the letters they wrote to the editor, or however the feedback was got to him, into account as he continued to shape the story. So this
Right.
goes way back.
So the true master of the popular fiction.
That's right. That's
Interesting.
right. Anna and I were talking offline about this, what we were going to say online here. And I said that really this is mostly about a series or something that's serialized. And Anna, you're going to talk about how that isn't necessarily the case, that it can apply to other kinds of writing. But the other one that I thought of that's more contemporary is Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. And this is my theory, and I would really be interested in anybody commenting if they agree with me. But Wolf Hall, the first novel in that trilogy, was really difficult to read. The way she used pronouns, every he in the book was Thomas Cromwell, even if another person had been speaking or had been being written about in the sentence previous. And that took a lot of getting used to, because that's not how we usually write our fiction. And the other thing was, she used every possible name for every character, the Duke of something, and then
Yeah.
nicknames and this and that. And it was really, really difficult to follow which character she was referring to. And I noticed, and maybe I'm simplifying my experience of reading the second novel, but my memory of reading the second novel is that almost all of that, or in fact, all of that was gone. And I think that was because of criticisms or
Oh,
comments that readers had about the first book, that it was so difficult to follow. Certainly the pronoun thing
yeah.
was much more normal in the second book. And I kind of missed that kind of puzzle of the way she
Yes.
wrote the first one, but it was absent in the second one. I haven't gotten to the third one yet. So that
And
my theory is that was based on feedback from readers.
that's so interesting. And that makes me think because that's the sort of thing that you would discuss with an editor, wouldn't you? She would have had the artistic choice. I want to use he because of these reasons, and the editor might push back or not. But then it makes me think maybe in the second book, the editor is almost like a gateway or a voice for the fans, because the editor, obviously the publisher wants to sell as many books as possible. So they have to be attuned to what will resonate commercially. So the editor might have said, look, Hilary, you've got to get rid of these too many names.
Yeah.
We've got to simplify it.
I may very well stand corrected in the comments that was my theory is completely off base, but it did occur to me. So can you remember, Anna, what did you say offline to me when I said this is really about a series of novels? And you said what?
Oh,
What did you say?
yes, I don't think it needs to be about a series of novels, in the sense that how do authors write their books, which I always find fascinating. And it's a whole process. So it's not a sort of a binary one thing or the other, is it? Because so much goes into a novel, starting with an idea, but then you're brainstorming the initial concept, but you're brainstorming or thinking of making choices and thinking of ideas all the way through, because each scene something has to happen. So what will it be, this or will it be that? So always thinking of possibilities, and right through to the writing and then through to the editing. And whether it's a series or not, I'm sure that there are interactions between authors and fans, even authors of standalone books, where fans will come up to them and say, I've got a story for you. And I can't, speak to that. I've never done that to an author, but I can imagine this, especially, I don't know why it makes me think of crime authors, but I'm sure that people come up to them with all sorts of things about, my great aunt disappeared and you've got to write about this. And of course, fact is stranger than fiction. So people's real life experiences, you just couldn't make it up sometimes. But I'm sure that happens. And I'm imagining from hearing authors speak about this sort of thing that mostly they go, thanks very much. And it really doesn't have any impact on what they write.
Right. Kind of
But
cringe as soon
maybe
as somebody
sometimes it
says,
does.
I can't not share this quick anecdote about one of the best short story writers of the 20th century, but who most people don't know and don't read, sadly. Her name is Mavis Gallant, and she was Canadian, but lived the last 50 years of her very long life in Paris and wrote wonderful literary short stories, almost exclusively published in the New Yorker. And she came back to Canada for some reason, and I went to the literary festival where she was, and I brought all my for her to autograph, and she was about 75 at this time, and she was
Wow.
really friendly and warm, and I was the first person in line, and she was signing my name and her name in every book, and she said, I'm going to be dreaming your name tonight. And I said, because she was quite friendly to me and so on, and so I said, oh well, maybe you'll use my name in one of your stories someday. And she looked at me and she said, I don't need any help with that, thank you very much.
Oh no. And then it all came to a shattering end.
Well, momentarily, she certainly was not did not suffer this particular fool gladly.
Yes. Well, speaking of names, I've heard about various charity auctions where authors very kindly
Me too.
donate a prize where you can bid you give them your name, or they'll use your name in a book, which I couldn't think of anything worse than my name appearing in someone's book, especially if it's a murderer or something like that. But I think obviously some people find that really fun, and the author doesn't mind because it saves them the trouble of coming up with a name.
Well,
So,
maybe Mavis Gallant would have begged to differ on that question.
yeah. I
can't-
think it's really interesting. S.J. Watson uploading the draft, I think some people would find that very confronting, and I'm sure there are authors who could think of nothing worse than putting their first draft on a website.
Now, the most egregious instance of this in a kind of warped way was what happened to, or what no, what's her name again?
Oh, Elizabeth
Eat,
Gilbert.
Pray, Love. What Elizabeth Gilbert did when she got a huge outcry because she had written earlier this year, she was planning to publish her latest novel was set in Russia, and it was set in maybe mid 20th century Russia in Siberia, about a bunch of anti-communist, anti-Bolshevik dissidents that had been sent into exile. And apparently, I can hardly believe it myself, but apparently, I mean, I know that she was attacked on Goodreads by people, but I can't quite believe that they were all Ukrainians. Anyway, they said, "How dare you write a book set in Russia with Russia invading Ukraine?" And she bowed to that pressure and she withdrew that finished novel from publication and said she was going to rewrite it to set it somewhere else.
I have a different take on that.
Let's hear it.
I think what happened was she wrote the novel. It takes so long to write and publish a novel. So that would have been a year or two or even longer earlier that she'd come up with the idea and wrote it. Set in, as you say, it was 1930s, perhaps, Siberia. So very distant from anything that's happening today. And indeed, I think some of the elements were protesting against the tyranny of that day in Russia.
Stalinism, yeah.
So that came into it. So anyway, she wrote the novel, and then by the time that it was due to be published, it was also, I think, from memory, earlier on in the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, I think it was early this year. Maybe I'm not remembering when it was.
It was very much in the news. It was that time where
Yes.
people had strong feeling. I mean, people still do, of course, have strong feelings, but sadly, as is the way of things, the news cycle moves on a little bit. But at that time when it was about to publish and have the big launch, and because she's so famous, of course, the launch would be a huge event. It was very much in the news, and certainly, from what I gather, some people did angrily write and say, this is a bit unseemly. Why are you celebrating Russia at this time? And of course, the novel certainly wasn't celebrating the current regime in Russia, but it just looked like, here's a novel about Russia. Yay, let's launch, is how it would have appeared. And I think she herself thought, you know what, this actually isn't the right time to be launching a novel set in Russia, even though there are all the nuances that mean that I'm not endorsing what Putin is doing, and it's really got nothing to do with that. I don't want to appear to be doing that. It won't necessarily be received well, might not sell well, it might harm my reputation, all of those factors. I think she was reading, well, as you say, I suppose being influenced by fans. Perhaps that is what was happening, but also just by the current climate. And there are cases where you might be about to launch a book, and then because of things that are going on in the world, it might be that you delay it by a week, for example, but it might, in her case, she's pulled it indefinitely. But then the reaction to that was a lot of fans saying, why are you pulling the book? We want, you should publish it, or you should feel able to publish it, certainly.
That is certainly a much more nuanced take on it. So I appreciate that very much.
There are a lot of nuances in the situation, I suppose, aren't there?
Yeah, certainly it is a rather extreme example of being influenced, not even to publish the damn book because people are upset about it in advance. So
yeah. My feeling was she influenced herself a bit, but she could
and
have
there
published
are
it.
cynical theories that the whole thing was manufactured to get more publicity for when it eventually gets published. So I don't.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And the other take on it that I read, I think this was possibly from Clara at Colour Me Lovely. And they have a podcast called One More Chapter, but an occasional podcast. And I think her take on it from memory, this is going back a while now, well, maybe other people have said this, that Elizabeth Gilbert's in a very privileged position where she can pull her book from publication because she's got a lot of, she's over the years
A-list
been
writer.
successful, and she can afford to do that. And what the downside of her doing that as a really, I think, optional thing, that was my reading of it, is that it means other authors might feel compelled to do the same who can't afford to pull their book from publication because they're relying on that to make a living. So that's another factor. From what the fans did, let's going back to the fans who protested or wrote to her saying we don't think you should publish, is more me as a fan. It would just be a case of maybe I wouldn't buy the book, but I wouldn't try to tell the author what to publish or what to write or what not to write. It's just a choice not to buy it,
especially not based on 15-line synopsis of what the book is about. How would you know if it's offensive or not?
Yeah, my fan approach is I wouldn't ever say to an author, even generally, I think you should write about this or you should write about that. But I'm interested more in when an author throws it out to the fans and says, what are your thoughts on this? Should I set the book in Cuba or Hawaii? Or I think that can be fun.
And really, that boils down to the openness of the author and their choice to take those views into account. But it's been happening for decades and if not centuries. It's never going to end. And now I have to do a global search and replace for my murder mystery manuscript and change the villain's name from Anna Baillie-Karas to I'm not sure what.
I would let you do it, Shawn. Definitely. You could use my name.
Anna, the murderous Baylor.
Yeah.
This was delightful as always. Thank you so much, Anna.
Oh, thank you for having me.